Act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire. Seneca. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Full Metal Cast. Thank you for tuning in and spending your valuable time consuming the content I put out. We got a spicy show today, but before diving in, something I failed to do before kicking off the previous episodes is let you all know I am open to feedback and questions on points that I make. Open debate and feedback are incredibly important, I believe, and I'll do my best to respond to constructive criticism. I won't engage with trash, but the things I talk about are incredibly polarizing, and since they are human topics, there will always be gray areas, meaning that typically there aren't always obvious cut and dry solutions. So, by offering the opportunity to have a dialogue, I'm hoping that I can encourage those who might find themselves struggling to come to terms with a given topic, the ability to ask questions and challenge my views in a judgment-free space. And help, maybe if someone's comfortable, I'll start making episodes with people who want to come on, join the show, if they're interested in doing so. And, I have no interest in the gotcha style of debate or interviews that you see on the news, but rather just having a conversation over a drink and maybe a smoke while, we just talk about life. I wouldn't even look to be the one driving the conversation. I'd want someone else to come in and really share their perspectives and not only shake things up in terms of what I offer on each episode, but to help expand the human consciousness. The internet is primarily an echo chamber, but if I can break that up even for a moment and give anyone listening the chance to empathize and not necessarily sympathize, but empathize with another person and their beliefs, I hold that this show would have achieved something. So, in short, don't be afraid to reach out. Additionally, while it might be obvious, my monologues on the first, more serious topic of each episode are indeed scripted. I want to make sure that I clarify this point, because I'm not trying to pretend to be someone who's just kind of riffing off the cuff here. I'm not nearly good enough at this yet. So to ensure that all the points I want to make are covered, adequately during these topics, during these segments, I spend about a week or so organizing my thoughts and restructuring them to make sure that they're delivered in the most coherent way possible. And now for the fun, sort of palate cleansing topics that I conclude each episode with, those are not scripted, as the stakes aren't quite as high if I leave out a talking point or two and I'm just having fun talking about the things that I like in life. Quick final note before diving into the first topic today: mental illness will be mentioned and referenced in this episode, and I want to make very clear that in this following topic, I'm not trying to incite fear or hatred for those who struggle with such burdens, but rather my objective is to highlight the ever-growing mental health crisis in this country. And so with that being said, guns. Specifically, in this episode, I want to address the sensationalist headlines and statistics that are being thrown around about gun violence and the statement that we have a gun problem in America, as well as our government's failures to keep us safe. Now, if you have spent any amount of time watching the news since the current administration came into power, you might have picked up on the fact that there have been a noticeable increase in headlines about mass shootings and gun violence. And to first address the sensationalist headlines regarding mass shootings, I challenge you to define what a mass shooting is. Would you guess that it involves a group of 5 or 10 plus people being shot and killed? Well, that was my guess, but a mass shooting, also called an active shooter incident as defined by the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, is an event in which one or more individuals are actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a populated area. The FBI has not set a minimum number of casualties to qualify an event as a mass shooting, but U.S. statute, the Investigative Assistance for Violent Crimes Act of 2012, defines a mass killing as 3 or more killings in a single incident. So, By definition, the starting point for an incident to be considered a mass shooting is someone shooting at more than one person. Oh, and according to the definition, nobody has to even be harmed since it says attempting to kill qualifies as an act of a mass shooting. This stretching of the definition of a term beyond what common sense and our historical understanding lead us to believe may feel a little familiar. Many scientific and medical terms that we have used and understood for as long as we can remember have been manipulated in a similar way, especially over the last 3 years. Now, I can't pin down when the current definition came to be, and if it helped contribute to the current media convergence on the topic. However, on a similar note, out of the 15,919 deaths that were the result of gun violence so far this year, 2023, what percent would you guess are suicides? Hell, did you even consider that suicides are counted as gun violence? I sure as hell didn't. Just based on all that you see and hear about the gun problems we have here, suicides surely have to be no more than 5 or 10%, hell, maybe 20% tops. It's over half, and it always has been. Now, I don't mean to diminish the loss of life here. This is a very important statistic that actually ties into my next point. However, this is something to keep in the back of your mind as people rattle off gun violence figures. The last statistic I want to take a stab at is not completely false, but it's not completely true or accurately portrayed either. Nonetheless, it has captured everyone's attention and makes for one hell of a headline. Firearms are the leading cause of death for children in the United States. Now, I will go a bit deeper on school shootings specifically in a bit, but it is important to highlight that this headline and statistic are not the same as children dying in school shootings. Again, firearms are the leading cause of death for children, it said. However, the rest of the headline actually goes on to read, but rank no higher than fifth in other industrialized nations. Now, going back, referencing the CDC data and the 2020 Johns Hopkins study everyone likes to quote, when looking at the causes of death in children from the years 1 to 18, yes, deaths involving a firearm are the leading cause, beating out car accidents, 3,219 to 2,882. And when looking at the age group of 1 to 19, the number of firearm related deaths jumps to 4,357. Remember, though, as you mentioned earlier, it is not made clear in the study whether these deaths were mainly murders, accidental shootings, or suicides. The study only says these are deaths involving a firearm. And, as we learned, the statistics would suggest that suicide is the main reason. And again, I am not diminishing this loss of life either. I'm simply pointing out that the grand total is not solely comprised of murders and school shootings, which you might be led to believe. Another important consideration that was not made super clear in this Johns Hopkins study is that it does not include infants when examining causes of death in children. When including infants, those younger than a year old, the leading cause of death becomes something different entirely. Congenital abnormalities are the leading cause of death in those 0 to 18 years of age and is more common than deaths involving a firearm for the entire 0 to 19 years of age population, 4,403 to 4,357. Now, congenital abnormalities exclusively impact infants, which is why they were excluded in the analysis. And I'm not arguing against the decision to exclude this group from the study, but it is important to keep that in the back of your mind. That is, the term children excludes infants. So when you're seeing those headlines, just, maybe hold on to that. I'm not saying that, the loss of life in the 1 to 18 or 1 to 19 age group due to firearms isn't an issue. I'm simply just picking apart the headlines that may be seeking just to gaslight the situation or, inflame it a little bit. And isn't it interesting that the failure of our government and the healthcare system they regulate to keep our mothers and their newborns healthy and alive receives essentially zero attention? But more to come as I conclude this topic later on. So, after looking at the popular headlines and statistics that are thrown around about gun violence, I want to attempt to dismantle the statement America has a gun problem. The stance I will be taking against this is that America has a mental health problem. And ultimately, I can start and end this tangent with the following study completed by the National Institute of Justice, or NIJ for short. Published in 2022, they confirmed that over the last half century, mass shooters were commonly troubled by personal trauma and nearly always in a state of crisis at the time they carried out the shooting. It goes on to state that in most cases, the shooter leaked their plans prior to carrying them out, and most guns used in the acts were obtained legally, either by the owner or the end user. Regardless of the findings, everyone faces stress, trauma, and crisis. Those are just a part of life. Now, there are certainly people who have a harder time than others for whatever reasons those may be, whether it be due to an actual disorder or disability, economic conditions, living conditions, etc. Those are all valid things that will compound the effects of stress. However, you cannot find one person on this earth that believes that dealing with stress or trauma by harming, let alone shooting and killing someone else, is a healthy or stable way to cope. Nobody of sound mind would deal with trauma by shooting somebody. This is not only a violation of our laws, but it violates the universally understood moral guidelines I touched on in the first episode when talking about natural rights we are born with simply by being human beings. If you are of sound mind, the harming of others outside of a self-defense or competition setting is something that you know is wrong regardless of written laws. And what really confounds me is that after every shooting that takes place, this simple fundamental fact is never considered. That only a mentally ill individual could possibly be capable of carrying out such an act, regardless if it's a kid, it's an adult, and wherever the shooting takes place. And it is no secret that mental illness has only been on the rise in this country, completely ignoring the youth. Over a fifth, 21%, of all adults in America are experiencing a mental illness. That's over 51 million people. And again, that's not counting kids who are much harder to collect data on. Additionally, those are only the adults that were reported. And considering that 55% of these 51 million people do not seek treatment, we can reasonably assume that the number of adults suffering from mental illness is much higher. And then you have to consider what the youth figure might look like. And knowing what our youth, our developing minds are having to deal with in social media and all of the shit that comes with it, about gender, race, the over politicization of everything, and yes, mental illness, the total figure simply has to be horrific. Hell, we're seeing that TikTok actually is convincing teens, primarily girls, that they have a disability or a disorder when really they don't. Some even began experiencing physical symptoms. And so, with this in mind, it has to be acknowledged that yes, there are a lot of guns in America, but this is not a new phenomenon. Civilians have, for the most part, always had access to firearms and firearms that are equal or close to what law enforcement or the military have had. Think about the revolution. And I love this example because when people say that the Second Amendment only applies to muskets and hunting rifles, because these rifles were the only ones available at the time, it can be said that Americans always had access to assault weapons. Oh, and another point I love to point out is that you have always been able to own a cannon in this country.
For any of the press listening, this doesn't violate anybody's Second Amendment right. There's no violation of a Second Amendment right. We talk like there's no amendment that's absolute. When the amendment was passed, it didn't say anybody can own a gun and any kind of gun and any kind of weapon. You couldn't buy a cannon when this amendment was passed. And so no reason why you should be able to buy certain assault weapons. But that's another issue.
In fact, you can and always have been able to buy one and have it shipped right to your front door without a background check. And that's just like any other muzzle-loading black powder firearm. This makes it much easier to purchase and obtain and own a cannon than any other gun. So why the fuck they use that as a talking point, I don't know. But this is why things don't add up when someone says, we have a gun problem. Gun ownership has always been a trademark in America, and access to guns has only decreased over time due to more regulation being passed. So why then can it be assumed that we have a gun problem when mental illness has been on the rise? especially when we accept the fact that anyone who would harm or kill others cannot possibly be of sound mind. This leads me to the last point on this topic: the failure of the state to keep you safe. Now, this point can be tied to the previous two in that the sensationalist headlines, the statistics, the paradigm of America has a gun problem are simply distractions to the fact that despite the rules, the overreach, the inconveniences we are all subjected to, kids are still dying to shooters who, in most cases, are on law enforcement's radar. The purpose of our government, or at least the one they have assumed, is to collect tax and grant us permissions in return for our freedom, all in the name of keeping us safe. Yet we feel less safe more than ever before. War with nuke brandishing Russia has broken out. War with China has all but kicked off already. Riots and demonstrations are taking place more as political tensions are ramped up in the name of generating votes. Poor health in mothers and their babies is a leading cause of death for children and infants. Mental illness continues to skyrocket, and the horrors that are school shootings still persist. And what is infuriating about the last example is that our representatives respond to the mentally ill individuals who murder children rather than focus on keeping the innocent safe and alive at school. The latest example of this? In March, Tennessee lawmakers passed SB 0001, which bans genitalia mutilation, outlawing administering to a minor a medical procedure if, for the purpose of enabling a minor to identify with or live as a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex. Weeks later, a transgender murderer shot and killed 6 people, including children, at a Christian Presbyterian school in Tennessee. Some mainstream media outlets and far-left LGBT groups sympathized with the murderer and called on the White House to oppose the state's efforts to ban gender-affirming procedures. The DOJ has responded to those calls and has filed a lawsuit against the new law, saying it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, as frustrating as this is, because this episode is not about transgenderism, though we are starting to see a trend of school shooters identifying as trans, I will not opine on the banning of these procedures at this time. This is simply to highlight that our representatives completely ignored the kids and staff at the school who were murdered because they do not care. They do not see themselves as responsible, and they are only concerned with keeping their job rather than doing it. Now, I hold this is starting to happen given how fast information spreads via the internet despite censorship efforts, but once it is realized that the trade-off of freedom for safety is not yielding the expected or acceptable results, the state will be seen as useless at best, and at worst, a detriment to the people. And given the condition of society today, it is not hard to see why one would be inclined to think the latter. And what better way for the state to shirk responsibility for these tragedies than to frame those following the rules but who happen to hold the tool of choice for the mentally ill to carry out their acts of terror? Guns have been made such a politically divisive subject simply for the purpose of driving voters to the polls. Therefore, blaming those who lawfully and responsibly possess them and value their right to do so is like a lit match to gasoline. It ignites instantly, and this shifting of blame preys upon our emotions as well as our human desire to have an undeniable villain or a solution. Objective thought, debate, and/or action are quickly thrown out the window as both sides focus on attacking each other and exchanging the common insults such as child killer, communist, white supremacist, socialist, extremist, and so on. All while ignoring the fact that every single thing the state has in place to prevent such acts from taking place have failed. In fact, you can say that they have only made it easier for such acts to be carried out by mentally disturbed individuals. After all, it is illegal to kill and attempt to kill somebody, but everyone knows this does not stop murderers. Similarly, we know that gun control does not work. Chicago will forever be a monument to the failures of gun control. And the same principle applies to school shootings here. Those who have already made the decision in their mind to do wrong, and in this case, take the lives of kids, will not adhere to the laws because they do not acknowledge others' natural rights. In short, those that will kill children do not care about the laws. But the rest of us will adhere to said laws. leaving us at a disadvantage at best when confronted with one of these monsters. And when it comes to the safety of our children or our natural rights, a disadvantage is unacceptable, especially when, realistically, said disadvantage renders us helpless. And this leads to a singular conclusion that has been reiterated many times by many different people, but it is not easily accepted by all as it brings forth yet another uncomfortable thought, because it's a human issue. Again, beware the frailty of man. This conclusion being, the fact will always remain that the only thing that stops these shooters is the arrival of an equal or greater force. If they choose to use a gun to take the lives of the innocent, then it will be a gun that will bring things to an end. Every shooting, school, mass, or otherwise, proves this. This is uncomfortable for many people, and rightfully so, as it means that you must reconcile with the fact that taking a life or threatening to take a life is the only way to realistically survive a situation where someone is threatening you with a gun. This is something that every gun owner should fully recognize and come to terms with before purchasing a firearm. You must accept that by carrying it, you accept that you will need to take a life in order to protect another when you reach for it. This should drive individuals to train extensively and be proficient with their firearms. That is responsible gun ownership. And yes, proper, safe storage is also a component of being a responsible gun owner, but just like how a dull knife will do more harm than a sharp knife, carrying around a weapon and not being accurate with it or lacking the proper judgment makes you a danger to yourself and those around you. Now, if asked what should be done, I call back to another point I made in the first episode. I do not believe that more guns are the solution to school shootings, or gun violence in general for that matter. But again, so long as civilians know how to use them, I don't think more guns will hurt the situation necessarily. Ultimately, what I believe needs to happen is a cultural shift. A shift in how we view responsible gun owners. These people have never committed the atrocities we have covered in this topic. Responsible gun owners are those who view firearms not as a spear or a sword, but as a shield, a tool to protect themselves and those that they love from others that see the same tool as a weapon to assault those they seek to prey upon. By possessing the means to secure one's natural right to live, responsible gun owners stand in direct opposition to those who seek to violate the same natural rights. Not a single responsible gun owner is okay with children dying. The thought that they are is simply a political talking point, and when you ask or you hear people asking how many more, as in how many more kids must die, keep that in mind. This is not a question. This is to be perceived as a threat made by the state that they will continue allowing kids to die until you admit that responsible, law-abiding citizens are culpable somehow. And I say allow because of how many shooters were on law enforcement's radar and all of the mechanisms that the state has in place to prevent such things from happening, but they fail every single time. All of the laws, surveillance, and power employed by the agencies, just like gun control in Chicago, are nothing more than monuments of the greatest failures yielding the most severe consequences of your government. And so to think that me, sitting at home, having followed every single rule related to firearms in this country, as well as the involuntary tenets of responsible gun ownership, and the reason or even related to the acts carried out by the disturbed, reveals an incapacity for independent thought. Einstein's parable of quantum insanity defines insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Why then should we expect more laws or government intervention to yield better or different results here? We know that those who break the laws do not regard them. So why would we accept more and send our kids off to school pretending that they will be safe? Again, calling back to episode 1, the government is not accountable for jack shit. They answer to nobody, and when they fail to keep kids from dying in schools, they blame you. As individuals, we are responsible for the outcomes in our lives. Our reliance on the state to secure the safety of what is most valuable has led us to this point, and it has never been more clear that they are unfit to be the ones keeping us safe. Rather than profiting off of patents and kickbacks and pushing drugs through the system, why doesn't the state focus on interventions that actually work to address the declining mental health of our country? If these people must occupy the seats they are in, I would tolerate them gladly if they were able to meaningfully address the crisis. Instead, they have chosen to become proficient at convincing the population that they are not responsible for either the shootings or the condition of our mental health. Perhaps not a single one of them is qualified for the job. Perhaps the way our government is structured prevents the best and most qualified from finding their way to the same seats occupied by inexperienced, unprofessional, and negligent fools. Perhaps the natural, God given rights that this country was founded on, and what the Constitution and Bill of Rights sought to protect, take a back seat to the avarice of our representatives, and that those same documents are now weaponized against we the people and are used to justify and lend legitimacy to the tyrannical acts that inevitably result in the most horrific outcomes in our society. Perhaps a topic for another time. I wish I can close this topic on a lighter note. But unfortunately, this is just a heavy topic, and there's no way around that. It will likely remain that way until effective measures start being suggested and implemented to keep kids in schools safe and to reverse the mental health decline. This is an incredibly important topic to discuss, though, and to keep it in the spotlight. And when someone suggests gun control or banning assault weapons as the way forward, don't become outraged, don't start yelling. Simply inform them that we already have the gun control they are likely thinking of, i.e., background check is required for every firearm purchase. Automatic weapons are illegal. Certain attachments are nationally banned. Guns cannot be shipped directly to individuals, and those who are addicted to drugs, who have been convicted of a felony, and who have a mental illness are not allowed to purchase or own firearms. You can also inform them that 77.2% of mass shootings are carried out with handguns, as confirmed by the same NIJ study referenced earlier that looks back to over the last 50 years. One analogy that might help put gun control argument and our side of the argument in perspective is that gun control or banning assault weapons is no different than rounding up all of the dogs and euthanizing them. Dogs bite people after all, and certain breeds are stronger, scarier, and capable of inflicting more damage than others. Pit bulls and German shepherds, for example, they're bred to be attack dogs after all. These are like the equivalent of assault weapons in the canine world. And when this theoretical person pushes back proudly with, well, there's no such thing as bad dogs or breeds, just bad owners. Well, you can smile and say that you agree. This is exactly the point we are trying to make. A responsible dog owner is no different than a responsible gun owner. Those that neglect their duty to be responsible or seek to commit acts of evil in training their dog or wielding a firearm are those that pose a threat. Those that partake in either responsibly are the people that every community needs. These people are the ones who have the best chance at keeping our families, our communities, and yes, our children safe. And sure, the last couple of shootings provided excellent examples of police in the area acting bravely and proficiently to neutralize the threat and prevent further loss of life. But these officers cannot be everywhere at once, and it is well documented that their required training is insufficient. So, how do we prevent these shootings from happening at all? Well, assuming the mental health crisis isn't going to get better anytime soon, I would pose that the best bet is to make our schools less of a soft target. Those who choose to shoot up a school do so for two main reasons: personal connection slash grudge, and to maximize the amount of carnage they can achieve to, in turn, maximize the amount of attention their act will get. Regardless of the reason, because for the most part you cannot possess a firearm on school grounds, shooters know that there is not a soul in that building that can reasonably stop them. Here is where things get very difficult, though, I realize. I cannot rant and be as critical and as inflammatory as I have been so far in this episode without sticking my neck out there somewhat and proposing some solutions. Now, these are simply my preliminary thoughts. What is implemented in the real world and is effective will be much more complicated. See, schools are already essentially like prisons. So finding a way to make them harder to infiltrate and to carry out violence within, without further making the act of going to school like being booked into a maximum security facility is a hard task. And this may prove to be an opportunity for companies to try to solve for down the road, but it is imperative to restrict access to those that should not have access in the first place, and to make forced entry as close to impossible as you can get while making navigating the premises once entering illegally incredibly arduous, if not the impetus of one's demise. And as I stated earlier, only the presence of an equal or greater force stops individuals from harming others. Therefore, I'm in the camp of having armed individuals on school grounds, whether they be proficient civilians, teachers, or law enforcement. I don't know what the training program or what the requirements are going to look like for this, but I do think that is something that needs to happen. If this route is taken, however, Classrooms, hallways, and the general layout of schools will have to be restructured and likely rebuilt in such a way as to minimize the possibility of collateral damage from the use of deadly force in a self defense situation. And this is the hot button suggestion, I know. And I do believe that if parents do not want their kids to attend a school where this is allowed, then they should be able to choose to send their kid wherever they want. However, if two schools are located across the street from each other, and the only difference is that one has trained people within who exist solely to ensure your child is not shot, I think that choice won't be so hard to make for many people. And like I suggested in the episode regarding censorship when rambling on about drag queen story time, if the solutions suggested here are an effective solution, the free market will take note. But accepting insanity as a solution via government restrictions and mandates in the example we're on now is something we cannot afford. So I take politicians' talking point and I aim it at them now, asking how many more. So to recap this topic, because it was a long and a heavy one, one, do not take the headlines / statistics you read regarding gun violence at face value. The definition of mass shooting is written in such a way so that it qualifies a lot of scenarios that one would not reasonably consider a mass shooting. And in a similar vein, headlines / studies are designed in such a way as to grab attention, like in the example of gun violence killing more children than any other cause of death in the US. We now know that congenital abnormalities are the top cause for those in the 0 to 19-year-old age group. Two, even the NIJ admits that mental illness is the trend in mass shootings, along with handguns being the most commonly used type of firearm at 77.2%. Only a mentally disturbed individual would deal with trauma in their life by harming another person. And three, the last point in this recap of this shooting topic, the state has been nothing but ineffective in keeping you and your children safe. Murderers and mentally disturbed people do not care about laws. By definition, we would be insane to think that the government will be able to do anything to change this, given their pathetic track record, really. If we do allow them to carry on, the world will only become a more dangerous place for people like you and I who adhere to the universally accepted moral guidelines that apply to the natural rights we are all born with simply by being human beings. And to ensure our children are safe, our schools and our communities must protect the natural rights of those within them from those that do not acknowledge these same rights, not the government. This can only be done by making the possibility of carrying out murder within them impossible. All right, fuck me. That was a long topic. That was a heavy topic. I do apologize. I'm gonna need a drink and a smoke, though. On that note, I did pull a smoke out of the humidor back there, and what I have been smoking lately are these. These are the JR. I don't know if it's gonna focus for me here. These are the JR cigar Cuban alternative, specifically the Montecristo #2 Cuban alternative. These are great. They always got specials running on them. I think now you can get them for like 4 or 4.50 a stick. I buy them in bundles of 20. These are great cigars to hand out, and they just are killer. I haven't had a bad one yet. They burn great. They draw great. They taste great. I haven't had a real Montecristo #2 in a long time. I do have one in the humidor sitting around. I've been saving for a special occasion. But I'm a budget smoker kind of guy. I do believe in the law of diminishing returns. And so for that reason, I struggle dropping, anything more than $10 a stick on a cigar. I think you can find great ones for under that price point that are consistently, not going to break the bank, but not going to make you feel bad for giving yourself cancer by enjoying them. So that's why I love these. And since it's still kind of light out and nice here, I'm going to slip out once I'm done here. But I can enjoy a drink in here. And what I'm going to do, what I'm going to pour myself today, is a little bit of the Calumet Farm small batch. This was shown to me by an old work colleague of mine. I went over to his house, God, 2021 maybe, discussing some career moves, and he showed me his Calumet collection. Sold me on the small batch and that it wasn't as expensive as, the 12 or the 15-year stuff, but thought it was very interesting, thought it was very good. It's not as high proof as I typically like. Hitting in at 86, I like that, real high sort of 120, 100 plus proof, the barrel strength stuff, but really great flavor out of this. Great to just sip neat, very enjoyable, a little sweetness, but it's been a while. So I'm going to pour myself a glass here now. just to take the edge off of such a heavy topic as we kind of bring things home here, Gotta enjoy the little things. So they punch my mic. Ooh, there you go. Get a little ASMR there, huh? Oh, yeah. Ooh. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep. Needed that. I'll probably take the mask down a couple times as we bring it on home here. But the last fun topic, as I'm sure you saw in the title, that I kind of want to ramble on here at the end to bring us home a little more of a positive note, a little bit of an interesting note. Fires, bonfires. Haven't met a single person that doesn't like one. And I haven't personally been around one that I haven't liked. In fact, we're probably going to do less of them now just because it's getting a little warmer here as we enter the summer months. But every Sunday night, my brothers, my mom, my dad, we get together for family dinner on Sunday. Everyone goes over around 4:30 or 5-ish, and we'll all sit around a fire. We'll enjoy, some bourbon, a cigar. That's like the barrier to entry. You always got to have a glass of bourbon, always got to have a cigar. We'll listen to new music. We'll talk about life. We'll talk about the world's problems. We'll talk about, new music. We'll talk about whatever it is. And we'll spend, 2+ hours out there just shooting the shit, catching up with each other and, just bonding. And that's just great family time. And those have really become some of my favorite days on the weekend. I have a great group of friends that I live very close by here, and we can get up to the usual degeneracy, if you will. We go out, we hit it hard, we drink, we party, and that's fun. But the family dinner nights and that time spent really talking and bonding around a fire is excellent. And I know I may have alluded to it rather when I was explaining why I started Full Metal Humidors in the intro of the first episode, sitting around fires talking about, interesting or politically charged topics where maybe we don't see eye to eye, but where we can openly debate in a friendly setting and not really, devolve into the screaming and the yelling that you see everywhere else. It's nice. And you walk away with a stronger relationship. And I think that's really helped our family dynamic. And it didn't need help. I guess that was kind of worded poorly, but it's really brought us together, even closer than before. We've always been very close. But it's just a great feeling. And it's just something I look forward to, towards the end of every week. In fact, why don't you drop a comment, whether it be in one of our posts, whether it be an email, whether it be a DM, whether it be if you're watching it on YouTube, what's a drink, what's a cigar, or what's a song that you recently discovered that surprised you? And I'll bring them, I'll buy it, or I'll queue it up on Spotify, whatever it is that you mentioned, next Family Fire. But one reason why I kind of came to believe why fires are so just pleasant and why people like them so much is that I think it's embedded in our DNA a little bit. And in fact, my favorite book of all time, and this sits at number one in my top 5 books, and I got to publish a reading list. I'm realizing now I've read a lot over the past 3 years. I've been spending a lot of time outside, which is great, or was spending a lot of time outside when the Wuhan flu was going around and you really couldn't do much. And that's when I picked up reading and I really fell back in love with reading, primarily nonfiction. I love learning about how the body works, how the mind works, evolution and whatnot. My favorite book of all time is The Hunter Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century by I don't want to I'm not gonna butcher their names here. I should know them though. They're the two smartest individuals I've ever heard. They have their own podcast, who's called the Dark Horse Podcast. Brett Weinstein and Heather Haying, I believe, is are their names. They're a couple, again, extremely smart, evolutionary biologists, and essentially the book just kind of goes through the history of evolution of the human race and how different technical advancements and the speed at which we are experiencing such advancements are impacting our biology. And it's a fascinating book. It's a great read, but they spend a lot of time going over fires and how impactful they were to, the human race and our evolution. So essentially, when we couldn't effectively hunt at night because it was too dark and our eyes weren't really like nocturnally set up, I guess, to hunt, if you will, we would build a fire for warmth and whatnot and to cook food. And But essentially, what was even more important about the fire was that we would gather around it at night and we would talk and we would share information. We would tell stories, but we would also, share our experiences trying out new methods of hunting or new locations to hunt. So, for example, if you sat around a fire with someone who maybe was from a completely different region, they might have introduced you to fishing. You might have never seen what fishing was if you were a completely landlocked tribe or were never around streams or, lakes that contain fish. Or maybe there's a different type of fish you need to fish for a different way. Just one example. But essentially, it was this sharing of information, this expanding of the human consciousness. And yes, that is exactly where I steal that from and why I love that phrase so much. That led us to evolve as quickly as we did and to become as adaptable as we were. And in fact, something that's fascinating from that same chapter in the book is that because we spent so much time around fires, as early humans, our eyes have more red light receptors in them or cones. It's been a while since I've read it. I got to touch back up. Because of this, that red light from the fire led that to sort of happen. And I think, again, this is the reason why I think everyone loves a fire so much. It is something just primitive in our bones, in our DNA that says, yeah, this is good. This is comfort. This is safety. And I think that's why people love singing and talking and just sharing and, just partaking in really good company around fire. Um, let's see, what else about fires? Oh, recently, well, maybe a month or so ago, you can probably go back and check out my post on it. I rented out a little A-frame sort of cabin out in the wilderness, out in the completely in the woods, completely away from people. No electricity, no gas, no nothing. I had a little wood stove and I had a light of fire to cook food and for warmth outside. And we were chopping wood like a wild man. We were living the, retreat out into nature, into solitude sort of phase there. And it was all of that. It was spectacular and I loved it and I want to do it again. I highly recommend, everyone get out there and just try that again. Even if it's just for a weekend, if it's a short weekend, that's fine, but give it a shot. And I of course overpacked, so I wasn't even roughing it that much. But I cooked over a fire. I had to build a fire for warmth, and I had to make sure I was prepared to go out there for more than 24 hours and make it out all right. And you know what? Never once did I feel like, wow, I'm really roughing it here. Like it just felt great the whole time, being outside the entire time, being one with nature. It is really all of that. And I didn't want this segment to really be, touch grass. It's really more so about fires. And so have more fires, enjoy the company of those that you like, those that you dislike, and those that you don't know if you like or not. Bring everyone into the fold, have conversations, try to empathize with people as best as possible. And I know at the beginning of this episode, I said, I want to bring on more people or highlight, more people who may not have the same beliefs that I have or you have, and just get to know them, get their perspective, hear their life experiences, and just empathize with where they're coming from. Again, we don't have to adopt their side. We don't have to say, oh, or concede that they're right. We've been wrong this whole time. That's not the idea. And again, because we're humans, that may never happen. There's always going to be a gray area. Not everything's going to be binary. Not everything's going to be yes or no. Everything's going to be a little messy that we touch. And again, pillar four, honestly, I could have just made pillar four the main pillar, I think, of this channel because it comes up so many times. And I think that just speaks to how messy and how complex we as humans are. And that's okay. We have to come to terms with that. We have to understand that that's just how it is. And I think that the whole social media instant gratification thing really, really makes that hard because that dopamine, that satisfaction of getting exactly what we want, exactly what we expect is always, right in our hands. And we get that all day when that's just not the real world. And it's always been said social media is not the real world. Everything you see on there is just fake. It's the best, most positive version of whatever the fuck you're looking at can be. And that's not how the world is. It's amplified, it's turned up to 11 when really that's just not realistic. You can't expect that. That's okay. And you find beauty in that too, I think. You see all the time, and everyone, it seems a little contradictory on social media. You'll see mostly females saying all the unrealistic beauty expectations, take pride in your stretch marks and all that, but they have a hard time, most people, and it's not just the females I'm attacking here, I'm just using it as an example. Most people have a hard time accepting the fact that real life isn't going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's not going to be perfectly filtered. You're going to have blemishes. You're going to have disagreements. You're going to have things that are going to be hard to accept and to comprehend and to come to terms with, and that's okay. So, rambled on a little bit there, but have some more fires. Learn how to light a fire. If you haven't done so in a while, just get out there and try it. It's a lot harder than you think, but it's a very important skill to have. And I think you'll find yourself making a little more friends if you can build a fire and you can invite people around and enjoy your company. You don't have to cook anything for them. And help tell them to bring their own smokes and their own drinks, and you'll just supply the music and the fire. I think if we have more of that in society, I think we'd all be a little bit, well, we'd just be better off for it. I think social media is not the bonfire we need. It's not the bonfire we deserve. The internet's good for certain things, like I said earlier in this episode too. It spreads information very quickly, and it could be very important information. But open debate and the sharing of ideas in a setting that isn't really conductive to, I guess, understanding where people are coming from or hearing tone or understanding nuance isn't really appropriate. So I think it's really understanding what social media is appropriate for and what it isn't is going to be critical here. Social media does not substitute, does not replace bonfires. And actually, this is somewhat related to the topic of the next episode I want to end it with, as I go into dating apps. So a little bit of a spoiler alert, but just recognize that that's not real human interaction. So again, I'm sort of rambling on here and I'm repeating myself. But as I close this thing out here, have more bonfires, have more tough conversations, have more fun conversations, have more stupid and silly conversations with everyone from all walks of life, whether you know them, whether you don't, whether you hate them. Just be open, just be accepting, and embrace your roots. So that'll do it for me today. Thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Full Metal Cast. We got really heavy there. I understand, I know, and despite all of that, I still go back to the first point I mentioned. I'm always open to feedback, always open to questions. Would love to highlight some of those questions and throw them onto the show. I did not skip over Q&A. I did not get any questions. I got to go bother the same friends who asked some last episode. So kind of brushing over that here today. So it'll be a nice short and sweet episode. As always, you can find our socials and the link to our website, the description below. The email's down there as well if you'd like to send us your Q&A, your feedback that way as well. I will have a prototype shirt design to tease next episode, and I may throw it on Instagram beforehand as well. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, all the episodes are on our website as well. No advertisers, so all sales from the website go directly to support this thing. And I think that kind of rips through the checklist of things I'd like to close out the episode with. But again, have more fires, enjoy the company of others, and don't let the headlines and all the shit that's going on in the world, really distract you and bring you down. That's not the norm. That's really more so the exception. So again, take everything with a grain of salt that you hear that is negative, and you'll find the more time you spend around fires and with good people, the better life really is. And you'll see that that's really how it is for the most part. So with that in mind, enjoy the rest of your week. See you next time. Stay metal.